Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and these are the 10 best epic cards to craft in the Journey to Unguro standard format meta. As I move through this list, please remember that when I'm ranking these cards, it's not just on a raw power level standpoint, but I'm trying to consider the cards that are going to give you the most average value for your dust. In other words, class cards are weighed less heavily than neutral cards because you can use them theoretically in a fewer number of decks. Also, cards from the classic set that are presumably going to be in standard format forever, or at the very least be refunded completely if they do move to the Hall of Fame. Those cards are going to give you more long-term value as well, and thus pay back higher dividends for the dust that you spent. That said, there will still be some class cards and some cards specifically from newer expansions that are just really dominant in the meta right now and are important to building some key decks. So all that said, let's go ahead and jump into the list. Starting off at my number 10 spot is the Warrior spell Brawl. This has been a staple in the class basically since day one of Hearthstone because, of course, historically Warrior has been a predominantly late game control style deck. Clearly there are pirates nowadays, but there is still control Warrior with taunt, essentially, and the taunt Warrior of today, and Brawl features quite heavily in that deck. This is just guaranteed AoE removal, which is very rare in Hearthstone. A card like Flame Strike can kill a lot of stuff, but sometimes minions have 7 health, 8 health, 9 health, and those kinds of spells don't work well in those situations, but it doesn't matter with Brawl. You can have 1,000,000 health and Brawl can still kill that minion, and that's just made it such a valuable asset for Warriors to recover from a lost early game, essentially kill everything their opponent has played, or darn near everything at least, and then stabilize later in the game. And essentially, if you're playing any sort of late game or control style Warrior, this is a card you're going to want to have in your list. And since that has been such a predominant archetype throughout Hearthstone's history, and most people are likely going to play control Warrior someday or another, Brawl feels like a very strong addition to any collection. Moving on to the number 9 spot is another staple class card, but this time it's Rogue's Preparation. A 0-mana spell might not seem all that strong if you're a new Hearthstone player, but this card is actually absolutely nuts because of the mana advantage and tempo that it can provide. Being able to cast a spell for 3 less mana allows you to do all kinds of crazy things in Rogue specifically. It's also fantastic with synergy cards like Gadgetzay and Auctioneer, which of course has made Preparation a must-run card in Miracle Rogue, which has been the number 1 deck for Rogue for basically like 3 years. And Miracle Rogue probably isn't going to go away as long as Gadgetzay and Auctioneer stays in standard format, and therefore Preparation isn't going to go away. But frankly, that's not the only kind of deck that can utilize this card. It's just such a powerful mana advantage that it's even used in things like Quest Rogue now in the Journey to Unguro meta. Being able to prep out the quest reward is nuts and can provide an insane swing on the game. So Preparation, one of the best cards in the game, really, at the end of the day, because of the mana that it provides. And if you're ever going to play Rogue, you just simply can't do it very well without Preparation. Up next at the number 8 spot is yet another class staple epic, and the final class card on this list. This time around, it's Mage's Ice Block. This is another one that is archetype defining because, of course, Ice Block is the central card to the Freeze Mage style of play, and much like the previous mentions with Control Warrior and Miracle Rogue, Freeze Mage has been around forever. It's popped in and out of fashion from time to time, but it always seems to show up again, and that's true even in Unguro. But again, that's not the only kind of deck that can utilize Ice Block. All kinds of even like aggro freeze decks and of course Reno decks in the past or Kazakus decks now still like to utilize Ice Blocks. Quest Mage, if that's still a thing, uses Ice Block. This card just shows up because it's so good. Being able to deny your opponent the single most important function in Hearthstone, which is killing you, being able to take that away from them is so powerful because it buys you extra time and extra chances to win the game yourself. And Ice Block is really, again, one of the best cards in the game, and I honestly think it should move to the Hall of Fame, but for now it's still here and could make a great addition to anybody's collection if they ever dream of playing Mage. As I move to my number 7 spot, remember that I'm not saying that these cards are necessarily better than the previous cards, simply that these cards are going to give you a higher return on your dust because they're neutral cards instead of class cards. So on that note, Gentle Megasaur is at my number 7 spot. And this is a card we've seen popping up just, of course, in Unguro because it is an Unguro card, but it's become very strong in Unguro because of the rise of Murlocs. And this is just the ultimate finisher piece for any Murloc deck. If you're able to establish 2, 3, 4 Murlocs on the board and follow up with Gentle Megasaur, it's usually a game-ending or game-winning play simply because the possibilities for adaptations are so strong. The only real whiffs are things like Taunt, or perhaps can't be targeted by spells or hero powers. Those aren't necessarily the best options, but things like Wind Fury, health buffs, attack buffs, poisonous can all be huge game swings that just simply win. And that's what makes Gentle Megasaur so strong, not to mention the fact that as a body, a 5/4 is fantastic for a 4-mana card anyway. That it has this strong of effect is just a bonus. This would probably still be a played card as a 3/3, but yet it's a 5/4, which is just nuts. And Murlocs, of course, there's so many strong ones in the Classic set, and in fact the best ones are a part of the Classic set, that even though Murlocs may not stay in fashion necessarily throughout this expansion or the next few, there's probably some point in the next 2 years that Gentle Megasaur is still going to return some value and show up again in a Murloc deck, because Murlocs are actually a pretty core piece of Hearthstone these days. Moving on to the number 6 spot is another card that takes advantage of a tribal synergy, but instead of Murlocs this time it's Elementals and the Blaze Caller, and yet again this is a perfect capstone card to top off any kind of Elemental deck. And although really Elementals haven't dominated the meta thus far, there are certainly a variety of Elemental decks that are possible, and most of them are halfway decent. And Blaze Caller fits, of course, in all of them because this is a neutral Elemental. And at the end of the day, a 6/6 body with this insane of a battle cry is a giant game-swinging kind of play. Being able to kill something of your opponents, or frankly kill them with 5 damage, is absurd, and then developing this kind of statted minion behind that effect is even better. And then the fact that it's also an elemental means you get to trigger future elementals as well, making Blaze Caller really the perfect synergy tempo body card for elemental decks. The only slight risk here is that perhaps Blizzard won't release elemental synergy cards or more elementals in future expansions, but I actually think that's really unlikely just because elementals are such a big part of Warcraft lore in general, and there were a lot of elementals that were already in the game, so it's not like this was just a Journey to Unguro thing. It seems like elementals are going to pop up from time to time, much like we've seen with Murlocs and Dragons and other tribes in the past. So it feels like a safe bet for the next 2 years that Blaze Caller is going to be the right card to fit into those elemental lists. Moving on now to the top 5, we've got Gluttonous Ooze, really the ultimate tech card. We've seen Acidic Swamp Ooze run with quite a bit of popularity in the past to answer weapons, but this is essentially that card's bigger brother, and it's better in virtually every way. A 3-mana 3/3 isn't bad, but this battle cry is nuts. You get to both destroy your opponent's weapon, which on its own right is a very powerful play, but then the fact that you get to add that weapon's attack as armor is even more nuts, making this the perfect answer to any deck that is both aggressive and runs weapons, just because it provides you so much life gain while still actually developing the board. And that's a really important thing to do, particularly as early as turn 3, but this can also counter late game weapons as well. And since weapons are such a big part of Hearthstone, Gluttonous Ooze looks like it's going to be a nice little tech card answer for a long time to come. Up next at my number 4 spot is Dirty Rat from Mean Streets of Gadget Zan. This card remains the best combo breaker card in the game. Basically any deck that's looking to do something specific, setting up a combo with late game minions, Dirty Rat can pull those minions from your opponent's hand and allow you to kill those minions or break that combo in essence. Now, combo decks aren't necessarily that prominent today, but Dirty Rat's utility in that regard is never going to go away. So you still can work some wonders with this card in things like Quest Rogue or Quest Mage in particular nowadays. But even outside of those specific instances, this is the kind of card that's going to stay a good combo breaking card for more than a year. And frankly, that makes it a really valuable asset to have in your collection so that you can adapt to the meta as combo decks kind of come into fashion. Dirty Rat gives you the answer you need, not to mention that sometimes you can just run this card in other contexts. If it's a super hyper-aggressive meta, this can be a good answer because you're likely to pull out a really small minion from your opponent's hand while developing an overstatted Taunt on turn 2. And we've seen this card with a lot of popularity in Taunt Warrior, of course, but it shows up in other control decks very consistently as well, and I don't think that's going to change. This is, at the end of the day, just a very powerful card. So now it's time for the top 3, starting with Primordial Drake, which to me is one of the craziest cards we've ever seen. This thing is just so powerful. I can't believe it's just a neutral minion released with an expansion. Primordial Drake, of course, is a 4/8 minion for 8 mana, which obviously a little bit understated for 8 mana, but this battle cry is absolutely absurd. It deals 2 damage to all other minions, giving you a ridiculously efficient board clear that's great against aggressive decks in particular, because you not only get to kill most of their little stuff, but you also set up a giant statted taunt minion as well. It just fits so well into a lot of different decks. Of course, Taunt Warrior most prominently, I suppose. But essentially any control deck can run this card, particularly when you align it with things like the Curator, which, actually takes advantage of this card's dragon synergies. There's also like Dragon Priest that utilizes dragon synergies with Primordial Drake. But at the end of the day, almost anybody that wants to play a late game style can find a way to run Primordial Drake and get value out of it just because this card is so darn powerful. So if you want to add just a really good minion to your collection and you like playing control, Primordial Drake is one of the best options for you at the epic rarity. And now as I move into my final 2 choices for this list, these are both cards that are part of the classic set, and that's certainly why they take these spots. These are the kinds of cards that are likely never going to go away and are always going to be valuable assets for you. The first of which is my number 2 card, Murloc War Leader. This thing is, of course, ridiculous in Murloc decks. It's the card you have to have if you really want to run Murloc decks, whether that's as a part of the water package with Finja and summoning this and some Bluegill Warriors for some crazy combo potential, or if that's simply just on a board-based Murloc deck like Murloc Paladin or even Quest Shaman that have become more popular with Journey to Unguro. You need Murloc War Leader to make those work because it's just such a good way to really leverage the Murloc board that you've established in the early turns, and it makes it so much harder to kill and so much more aggressively statted that it often just wins you the game and kills your opponents. So not everybody loves Murlocs, of course. If you don't think you're ever going to play Murlocs, maybe this card would be a waste. But given how often Murloc decks tend to pop up and look like they're going to continue popping up in the meta, and the fact that this is a part of a really important little package of cards with Finja, Murloc War Leader seems like a pretty obvious choice to craft, and Murlocs look like they're always going to be around, and this will likely always be the best Murloc card, simply because it's so strong and it's fundamental to that tribe's success, that Murloc War Leader is a great choice to craft if you're looking to spend some dust. But I do think there's one epic card that's a better choice, and even though it might not be played quite as much as Murloc War Leader is today, this is the kind of card that doesn't rely on a tribal synergy to be good. It's great in a lot of different environments, specifically control decks, of course, but a lot of different classes and decks will want to run Doomsayer, and that's why it's my number 1 choice. It's just such a good card at slowing down your opponents, often destroying their board, but also stealing an entire turn of tempo. If they don't have an answer for Doomsayer, they can't often develop additional minions at the same time. So not only do you kill the stuff on board, but you slow them down for another turn, allowing you to take the initiative on the board, stabilize some health. And in a control deck, that's exactly the kinds of things you're trying to do, making Doomsayer such an efficient answer at 2 mana. This is such a good card. It's going to pay you a ton of value back in the long run. And if you are someone who ever plans to touch a control deck unless you play only aggro, maybe you wouldn't get a lot of value out of Doomsayer, but otherwise this guy is going to be a star in your collection and the most valuable and efficient epic card that you can craft. And there you have it. That's my list of the 10 best epic cards to craft. Now, I'm curious what you guys have to say about this list. Do you think I got it all wrong? Do you think I got the order mixed up? Do you think there shouldn't be any class cards at all on the list? I'd love to hear your take, not only because I'm curious how you guys feel about the list, but also because I think the discussion that everyone provides in the comments are really valuable for people who are looking for essentially second opinions or a consensus on which cards are the best to craft. So you guys are going to be really valuable in making this video valuable for future viewers. All that said, thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on.